This is the Rising Tide Startups podcast, where we chat with startup founders from all over the globe to help you escape the cubicle and begin your own startup journey. Make sure you take notes. Every episode of Rising Tide Startups is sponsored by Podbrand Media. Let Podbrand create and host your company branded podcast. Learn more at podbrandmedia.com. This is Kevin Pro with Rising Tide Startups. I have another great guest this week, Bradley Hamner. Bradley, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Kevin, thanks so much for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to it.
The very first thing I want to say, Bradley, is War Eagle. So, I want to welcome you to the podcast. I want to unashamedly say my favorite team, my favorite college football team is anybody beating Alabama. It's a pretty limited showcase there, but man, this show is not about my football preferences. This is about Bradley Hamner on Rising Tide. So share a little bit. You and I met at a networking event, Bradley. How would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, first of all, great way to introduce me by saying War Eagle. I mean, I'm telling you what, you really got me fired up, especially coming off of basketball season. I mean, my football team has not been performing very well, but hopefully we'll start to turn the corner here recently, and hopefully we can take down the Tide in a couple weeks. So I'm a small business owner, entrepreneur. I'm kind of a business geek in general. I love all things business. My dad's a small business owner. He's in farming and agriculture, and so I think that seed was planted in me at a very young age, although farming was never going to be my interest. I have pretty bad allergies and asthma, and so I was just never able to really be intimately involved in that business. But I really picked up something from my dad that has had a huge impact on me. And that is, I really just saw from my father what it meant to work really, really hard. I mean, people say that all the time, but in the farming industry, like, you actually see what it takes to plant and to harvest at 2, 3 a.m. because before rainfall comes in, et cetera, and the ups and the downs and the things that are somewhat out of your control, political changes, changes in the commodity markets, et cetera. I saw my resiliency from my father then and even still to this day. And that's one of the biggest things that I brought into when I started my first business in 2009, 2010. And I'm so grateful for that. And that is the exact same thing that I needed to get lift into that business. And it worked up until the point that it didn't. And ultimately, I kind of hit a point of burnout, thought I was going to go back into the corporate world, had a chance encounter, thank goodness, in Toronto. I was really close to leaving entrepreneurship and kind of waving the white flag. But ultimately, I was able to make some changes first inside of me, and then into the business directly, and was able to really start to grow and scale that company. Have since been able to launch 5 other startups during that period of time. And one of the companies is we work with small business owners to help them to do the exact same thing that I did.
So think back that day that you walked out of kind of your corporate gig and stepped into your kind of solopreneur gig. Describe that moment as best you can remember, and maybe the fear and trepidation, armed with excitement, kind of a melange of emotions. Talk about that.
I was young, but I was naive. I actually had zero fear. I had zero fear. Back
Yeah, hey, I
then,
can
I was like,
recover.
truthfully, I really didn't. I was confident that I was like, I can make this work. I really believed in myself to be able to do it. It really felt like that business, which was in the financial services industry, that I was going to be able to, I knew how to sell. That's what I was previously doing out of college. I knew how to sell. I knew how to talk to people. I knew how to network. I wanted to lead a team. I wanted to own a business. I just know when it was going to be. And so that opportunity presented itself. And so I really didn't have a lot of fear. I was like, no, I'm going to bet on myself. And I really wanted to do what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, with who I wanted to do it, and have the money to do so. I mean, it really was. Now, I didn't use these words at the time, but I mean, it really was freedom and flexibility. I wanted to control my own destiny, right? I enjoyed that about sales, but I especially wanted all of the control to be with my time. Like, if I wanted to go, I played golf in college, so I love to play golf still to this day. And so if I want to go kick off on a Friday and go or go on a golf trip, I wanted to be able to do it. Okay. And then at the time, I had very young son, like a 1-year-old. But down the road, I was like, hey, we're gonna have kids' activities and things I'm gonna want to be able to do. I want to be able to have the money to do that. I want to be able to have the flexibility to have my own schedule. I mean, I guess it's kind of the American dream in a way.
Sure.
I mean, as cheesy as that may sound, I mean, it really was that. But I think I saw it a lot from my dad,
Hmm.
but I also saw how hard he worked. And yet, that same thing I learned from him, which is like sometimes your greatest weakness as an entrepreneur can become your greatest strength. And that was kind of mine too, is that I just knew one thing, and that was gas pedal on the floor.
So you mentioned the Toronto encounter. What was the Toronto enlightenment moment that you had, that aha moment that you said, wait a minute, I don't want to go back to, that's why I did this in the first place. So
Yeah.
what was
Well, I
that
got to take
encounter?
you back first. So it's June of 2015, and there's a picture that I have that I posted on social media back then that is of two computer screens in the Disney Yacht Club lobby. And I'm running a team meeting that day that I felt like I needed to be running while I'm supposedly on vacation with my family. What is the worst part of that, though, Kevin, is the caption that I put, better never stops, even on vacation. That's actually what the caption says.
Mm,
And I cringe looking back on that, seeing it now. A month and a half later, month, 2 months later, or something like that, I'm doing like a workout and I have panic attacks. I didn't realize it was panic attacks at the time, but I ended up calling a physician friend of mine, went and saw him. Then he gets me in to see a cardiologist the next day. He was concerned about some stuff. And I wish I could tell you, oh, that was the light bulb moment. That was the thing that everything changed. Actually, no, I didn't know what to change. I
hmm
didn't know what to change. The thing that I had been doing, I thought was working. Now the business had began to plateau at that point. So what did I do? I just worked harder, like my dad has done. Well, if I just keep working harder, then I'll work myself through it. But I really was burning the midnight oil, morning, noon, and night. And it caught up to me. I started having panic attacks, started feeling, pains in my chest. So it was a few months later that I'm actually in Toronto at Strategic Coach, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with Dan Sullivan and his work. But so we're doing the exercise, which is 10x is easier than 2x, which is now portrayed in the book. But at the time, this is 2015, that was just a framework that they had in the
hmm
program. I'm sitting next to an individual who actually played professional baseball, and he was in the financial services industry too. And so I had this connection. And so we do this thing, and he goes first. So in my head, I'm thinking, he probably does 750 to $1 million, something like that. He literally, I remember he had his hat backwards. I was in like a sport coat. He was
hmm
laid back. He said, well, last year we did 40 million top line. I made 5 million personally. And here's what 400 million 50 look like. I was like, wait, do what? How much did you do? You do what now? And he said, look, it's systems and processes. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sick and tired of hearing that.
Yep.
I am so sick and tired of hearing that. I've heard that from so many different people. Nobody actually ever shares with me what that actually means. And he says, well, I'll show you. And Kevin, here's the thing. What changed in me that day, I don't even really remember much of the rest of the day except for that encounter and then what he showed me at lunch. But more importantly, when I got on the plane on the way back, it was more of the change that happened inside of me. Like, meaning I saw myself differently. Instead of being the doer of the things, I needed to see myself as the designer of the things.
hmm
I went from being the rainmaker of my business to I became the architect of my business. And at first, it was an identity shift that needed to happen. And then it started happening to where we actually, for the first time, started to document things about what we were doing in the business. So it wasn't all in my head. And then we created playbooks and then, of course, formed that all together to form an operating system. So, hence, obviously, the company is now called Blueprint OS.
Right.
And so that's what we teach other small business owners to be able to do is become the architect of their business. And so that's a little bit about my story and transformation.
Man, thanks for taking the time to kind of drill down on that, because I think, laying that foundation is going to be important and later as we talk about this, because I think it'll also give some street cred kind of to the story itself, of the system that you built. But we've all heard about, EOS and other
Yeah.
systems out there, but it sounds like to me that this one was it's very personalized, because not only did it's easy to say, it's easy to talk about, hey, just put systems and processes in place, much more difficult to implement. But you actually had this epiphany that said, it's not just kind of the myth where you're stop working in your business, start working on your business. I mean, you really are moving from the where you talked about, I mean, very specific, the rainmaker to the architect. So describe those two things and the differences between those and maybe the difference it can make in somebody's business.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So I'll go a couple different directions on that, and then we can double tap on whatever you want to. So yes, very familiar with the scaling up methodology. Number one, so if people have read the book Scaling Up, written by Vern Harnish, um, Gino Wickman, who wrote
Hmm.
Traction, is actually a disciple of Vern Harnish. So he took a lot of the kind of ideas, et cetera, from scaling up, and he went and started EOS. Love EOS. I think there's a lot of things in there that are fantastic. However, if you read the book Traction, depending on the size business you're in, we work with business owners doing between 300,000 and 3 million. That's our sweet spot. If you're
Hmm.
doing 300,000 in annual revenue to 3 million, that's a space we know really well. Good luck trying to implement all of the frameworks of Traction in EOS inside a business doing a million or 2 million. You
Hmm.
don't have a leadership team. Okay, you're not running a leadership team. You don't have a C-suite person. That's
Hmm.
ridiculous to think that way. If you're doing 10 million and above, I think that's great. If you're trying to take your business from 10 million to middle-sized company doing 25 million or more, fantastic. If you're doing 100 million, you're probably running on something like scaling up. And so for me personally, I love a lot of the concepts in there, but there was still a lot of details that were being missed of like, yeah, but EOS doesn't teach you how to like actually do documentation. Like it doesn't
Mm.
do that,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it doesn't tell you where to put all the stuff. Okay. It touches on it a little bit. Even if you read one of their kind of sister books, Process, okay, it gets you indoctrinated into the importance of doing it. But there's still a lot of details that a business owner doing at the time. I was doing 600,000 in revenue, that I was like, I can't figure this out. I got a team of 4 to 5 people. Where do you do this? How do you get this stuff out of your head? And those were some of the problems I was still stuck with, even though I was introduced to some of these ideas in EOS and scaling up, et
Hmm.
cetera. I loved it. I was struggling with how to apply some of those frameworks to my much smaller business. Okay. Much smaller business. And to a business owner doing 500,000, getting your business to a million and then getting that business from a million to 3 million, that's life changing. That's
Yep.
life
Yep.
changing,
Generational change, generation change.
generational
Yeah.
change for that business owner, right? 91% of businesses never even hit a million.
Hmm.
Okay. So, when Traction throws around things like doing 10 million, 15 million, and they're throwing it around like $1 million like it's nothing. Hey, to a small business owner doing 1.5 million, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of revenue going through that business. So those are some of the differences in particular is that we really know that space well. We know what it's like to go from 300,000 to a million and then 1 to 3, and also tell you that's why actually my podcast is called Above the Business, is because I love the concepts taught in E-Myth by Gerber. I just think that there's a third dimension, and that is how do you work above it? So it's not just
Mm.
on it
Hmm.
or in it. I think there's in, and then there's above. And so how do we, as the business owner, flex between some of that? So when we look at it on a weekly basis, I'm spending some of my time in it. I'm spending some of my time on it. And I'm spending some of my time, I need to get kind of above the business. We can talk
Mm.
about some of the things about what that actually looks like and bring it down to, practical terms if you want to. But yeah, those are my thoughts on those two things.
I mean that is a great segue because we do try to move from like you're landing the plane over the course of the podcast here. So, like we just started the descent into Auburn International. So we've got we've gone from 30,000 feet. We're about 10,000 feet right now. We kind of see the airport in our sights, but talk about like lessons learned, practical pillars, that are a part of this system that leave our listeners with something that is really practical that they can say, you know what, I this is not the final solution, but this is certainly the start to me transforming, where I am today to becoming that architect.
Yeah, for sure. So what I'd like to share with your listeners and for the business owners out there, there's not a single business owner I've ever met that if you ask them, what is it that you want? They're going to give you some answer that symbolizes, I want to grow or I want to scale, right? They're going
Hmm.
to say that. But then you push them on like, well, what do you mean by scale? It's hard for them to define, like they don't know what that means. And so even in our own language, you may say, Bradley, I kind of get it. You want me to become the architect of my business. Okay, I get it. Is that just conceptual in nature?
Hmm.
Or is it like actually a thing? How do you know when you've become the architect of your business? And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to go over our scale framework, which we use as an acronym, SCALE, and that will actually help people kind of walk away with a tangible thing of how to think about it in their own business. Does that sound
We're
good?
gonna take a pause right here just for our ad spot, man. We're gonna leave our listeners waiting with bated breath to be able to fill out these four letters here. But right now, we're gonna listen to our ad spot for our listeners here. At Navicus, we know you spend far too much time on administrative tasks. Let us take those off your plate so you can focus on the highest value activities in your business. We have highly trained, highly vetted specialists ready to take on those administrative responsibilities at an affordable and effective rate. Check us out at navicus.com, proud sponsor of Rising Tide Startups podcast. We are back. This is Kevin Pro with Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Bradley Hamner. Bradley, thanks again for joining us. And I left us hanging on the edge of a cliff here. You're going to have to help us off that ledge. Talk about the scale framework you were about to share with us.
Well, I know not everybody is going to be able to see this, but Kevin, you'll be able to see it. So this is the actual award that we give to our members. And so it actually uses the scale as an acronym. So we call it the Rainmaker to Architect Journey Award using SCALE. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of briefly go over what each one of those mean.
Hmm.
And then we can kind of go wherever you will want to. So number one, if you're going to become the architect of your business, it is a huge deal, as I was just mentioning a minute ago, with sustainable revenue. And that's the S in scale, meaning getting your business greater than $1 million in top line revenue is absolutely a huge deal. 91% don't make it there. And if you're already north of a million, what does getting your business to 3 million look like? So that's the two levels of revenue that we look at with our small business owners. Number one, was the business look like your business look like at a million? And then if you're already just north of a million, what does your business look like at three? Most of our business owners, especially when they come in with us, are doing typically between about 750,000 and about 1.2 million. There are a
Hmm.
lot of them are right around that spot. And so some of them have already crossed that milestone. And then we help them to see what does a business look like at $3 million. Okay. Number two, it's great that you got a business doing over a million, but what do you also want? What else? You want it to be growing year over year and profitable. You want it to have growth and profitability. And we use a term called the rule of 40. So you take your year over year growth added to your profitability number, and we want that to be 40 or above. So typically people will kind of have a 15 and 25. I want to grow 15% year over year with 25% profitability, or maybe 10 and 30, depending
Hmm.
on the business that you're at, and also depending on where you are in your lifestyle. You may need a little bit more profitability to take home as distributions for you and your family, but you also may be in a season where, hey, my profit's good. I'd like to reinvest some of that profit into growth. So, number two, or second framework, is C, consistent growth and profitability. Well, that's great. We got a business doing over a million, it's growing and it's profitable. But if we're doing what I was doing 10 years ago and we're just working around the clock all the time, what good is it for? So we actually encourage our business owners to take off at least 12 weeks out of the year. We call that time away. That's the A in the scale methodology. So time away. Now, for somebody listening to this, they first of all may say, I have no idea how much time I've taken off this year, A, or B, when they hear 12 weeks, they're like, what? 12 weeks? I'm not taking off 12 weeks. I have no idea, what that would even look like. But indeed, if you actually have a plan in place or a roadmap to follow, you can get there. L, Well, great. So we have a business doing over 1 million. It's growing and it's profitable. We're taking ample time away from the business, but also we want to have leverage in the business. We love the concept of buy back your time from Dan Martell. So if we are doing the things in the business that actually grow the company and allow us to do the things that we love, we have leverage. And we specifically say that you need to have leverage with an executive assistant. If you want to get to 1 million or get to three and you do not have an EA, you are one and you're not a very good one either. So we think it's not a
You are
luxury
one
to
and you
have
are
an EA.
terrible.
You're a terrible one. Yeah. So you got to have leverage with an EA. You really do. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity for a small business owner. That's a big mindset shift. And then lastly, is you do have to have efficient operations. And how do you have efficient operations? Well, you have it with an operating system. And so something that the business is running on outside of you. So that's what we help our business owners do. We help them to become the architect of their business. And how do they do that? We use our scale framework to do it. What does it look like to get to 1 million? Have a business that's growing and profitable, taking ample time away, having leverage with the executive assistant, and that business is running on something outside of you. So when people join our program, we mail them this award, and then along the way, they qualify for these milestones. So we don't send them these milestones immediately. They actually, in our program, will go through and, most people have already knocked off one or two of these, maybe three, and then we help them to fill the rest of this out. This is our specific outcome of what we help small business owners to do.
So if you're watching this on YouTube, you obviously saw that scale. If you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I would encourage you to pop over on YouTube to be able to, about 20 minutes, 21 minutes into the chat here, there's you can see the scale that he was holding up on the podcast. But and those are let me play devil's advocate here. Those are great to hear. How do I come to you? If I'm coming to you and I'm at 700,000, it's easy to say, yeah, I want 15% growth a year and I want 25%, profitability a year. It's easy to have goals. It's a lot harder to reach them. So other than processes and systems you're putting in place, what are some other, magic dust that Blueprint OS brings to the table?
Well, I don't think there's any magic dust. I'll say that. I really
It
don't.
doesn't
I
exist. Yeah.
think that there are things that you can do to give you the best chance. So, number one is most of the people we talk to, whenever, if they're in that space of the businesses we work with, they say, yeah, that's exactly what I want. I want to get the company to 1 million, or I want to get it to three. And I want the thing to be growing year over year and profitable. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. Okay. Well, you need a roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
You got to have a roadmap.
Yeah.
So something that you can point to and say, this is what I want. This is the roadmap I'm following, because people will talk, and we talk about it all the time, is that ideas are everywhere. I mean, even somebody listening to this podcast, like you can take this and there's a lot of ideas that maybe I've shared, but it's the implementation of
Mm-hmm.
it. So what you're actually saying is like, okay, great, cool. What do you do to help them create that? Well, number one is we help them to actually create their individualized scale roadmap, because everybody's at slightly different places with their team, their culture dynamics, et cetera. So that's number one. So do you have a roadmap? Because if you have a roadmap, then you can go execute on the roadmap. Here's what I mean. If I have a roadmap, then I can follow the roadmap. If I know where you are, and I'm going to come from Huntsville, Alabama to where you are, I'm going to throw it in Google Maps. Well, then once I put it in Google Maps, it's showing me the way to get there, but then I got to follow it, right? I got to follow it. And then inevitably, when my business and I get off track, do I have something that I can come back
Mm-hmm.
to reorientate me? Like the analogy is like with planes. I mean, if you're flying from LA to New York, they don't fly in a straight line, right? They're always a little bit off course. And so we just don't really have that in our businesses unless you go and design one. And so that's why having a roadmap is so valuable. Okay. So you have a roadmap. The other thing is I do believe in the power of being in a community where
Mm-hmm.
other people are in that general space that you're in. Okay. If you're doing 750 and then you're in a group of other people doing about 750 to 1 million, you're talking about the same things. I mean, like in general, I can pretty much guess based on revenue numbers how many team members people have. And sure, I'm off maybe a little bit here and there based on some fractional VAs and things like that. Sure. But for the most part, you kind of know there's business principles at play. If you're
Hmm.
doing 750,000, you don't have 75 employees. Like you just don't.
Right.
It
Right.
just doesn't work that way. Okay. So with that, you then get yourself in a community of other people that really can help you to shape that. And then, of course, our weekly coaching sessions that we do, we believe where we go deep into some of our methodologies where we actually have time spent to, carve out or implement those. And I think that's one thing that kind of is unique about kind of our community and our curriculum, so to speak, is we carve out the time to do it.
It's also a community of peers. I mean, that you don't have another me in my company,
Right.
so there's no internal community that I'm building here that are
Yep.
facing the same headaches and sleepless nights and whatever. So you
That's
got
right.
you got a roadmap, you have the community built around that. What else is kind of built as a kind of a supporting framework of scale?
Yeah. Well, we actually called this whole thing the three C's. So we call it the content, the coaching, and community.
Okay.
So, okay, ideas are everywhere, implementation is everything. Okay, first of all, a lot of the time, like for instance, I'll give you a specific example, the OS. Okay. So they say, all right, Bradley, you struggled with this. How do you help us to implement an operating system? Well, we have all of the playbook templates built. So just use our templates that we have for the operating system for every playbook that we have. There's a certain number of playbooks that we believe an operating system runs off of. We just give you access to those. Take ours,
Hmm.
fill your information in, and then you actually can go about knocking it off, like actually building your operating system for your business. So that's the content piece. The coaching is obviously where you are coming on weekly or in our in-person retreats and being surrounded around other people on those calls, those other peers that show up on a weekly basis. And then, of course, is the community piece of that. And just to see, there's so many stories I have of people that have connected kind of outside of even our sessions that we have or
Hmm.
our in-person stuff where you're around and you actually build true community. And I know people throw that around a lot, but I really do think that whenever everybody is striving for the same thing, and in our world, they're striving to knock these milestones off, that there's a common language that's used, and the language of the community that's there
Hmm.
of our members is absolutely fantastic. And I really believe that the value of a community is who you don't let in the community. And so we really want to work with really great people that are doing in that range.
Hmm.
And we try to be really consistent with that. If somebody's doing less than 300,000, then we've got some other stuff we do to help them get to that point.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when they're at that point, then to qualify. And then honestly, some of our members have graduated past the $3 million mark. And, I've worked with a number of companies that were doing 400, 500,000 when they started with us. And now they're doing three and a half or $4 million in top line revenue. And they just need to knock off a couple of the more of these milestones, and they will have graduated past us. And that's a
Hmm.
good thing. That's
Yeah.
a good thing. That's
Yeah.
what we want our members to be able to accomplish.
I also think you're building very strong advocates, testimonials that say, hey, we were at 400,000, now we're exiting at 4 mil. That's a pretty
Yep.
strong testimony, to share the growth, I guess the efficacy of the system itself. But we've talked about a lot of things today and covered a lot of ground, but what's one thing that we have not touched on that you think would be a really good way just to kind of wrap us up today? And then I certainly want to give you space to share where people can find out more about Blueprint OS.
Well, I kind of opened a loop earlier that I feel obligated. I want to close, and that was when I talked about getting above the business and
Hmm.
specifically time when you're working, not just on a weekly basis, on in and above. And while obviously I don't want to go too deep into all of those and give too much, but I will give a couple things specifically. And one thing you can do on a weekly basis that we actually share and teach with our members. So we help them to build what we call PRW, or perfect repeatable week. Okay. Sometimes it's referred to as an ideal week.
Hmm.
We kind of you look at, as a business owner in particular, this is important, as entrepreneurs or business owners, how you design your week should be different than anybody else. Certainly different than your team. It's way more about energy management than it is just time management. Okay.
Hmm.
Because where you apply your energy as a business owner matters a lot. And so when we think about that, all right, well, what is working above the business mean, like an actual tangible thing? And so I'll give you one. We actually encourage our members to carve out 60 to 90 minutes once a week. That's all it is. 60 to 90 minutes once a week to get out of the office. And if you work from home, get away from the house. Okay. Go to your favorite coffee shop. A lot of our members send pictures of them doing thinking time
Hmm.
from Starbucks. Like, it happens all the time. People sending their coffee and their notepad of them spending time thinking about the business, because we believe the most important thing you can do for your business is to actually spend time thinking about the business. You may say, well, that's ridiculous. Why would that be the most important thing for your business? Because everything that happens, everything that you execute on, who you hire, who you develop, all of the tools, the concept, all of it is ultimately coming from your head as a small business owner.
Hmm.
And so spending at least 60 to 90 minutes once a week, that's all it takes, thinking about the business will be transformative. And for the members that do it consistently, the transformative nature. I mean, we even have one member, it's in Seattle. He takes now an entire day. He calls it his above the business day on Wednesdays. He doesn't go into the office. Now, he's not sitting there for 8 hours just doing
Yeah.
nothing but drinking coffee and thinking, but it's his above the business day. And to me, that is a really good example. And he's been able to the work he does in the business, how much his business has grown revenue wise, his profitability, just honestly his enjoyment of the business.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a
That's
metric that we
huge.
could
Yeah.
like start to measure,
Hmm.
but just how much a business owner do you actually enjoy what you do, right? And not feel like it's a grind all the time. I mean, if there was a metric to measure that, which I wish we could, like almost a business owner satisfaction score or something
Hmm.
like that with their own business, that's one of the things that has actually become a huge benefit with our members. So that's what I encourage people to do, is to carve out 60 minutes once a week to spend time thinking about the business.
I love that. And as you were talking about, I'm just saying, my gears are always spinning even as I'm listening during these podcasts, but I'm thinking you need to go from scale to scaled, put a D on the end of it, and the D means delight. Like how much,
Oh, that's good.
what's your delight factor at the end of this, or in this journey? What's your overall, like, I love it. You're kind of like it's the EPS or whatever that or net promoter NPS, your net promoter score,
Yeah.
for the delight you have in your business. But man, this has been really good, Bradley. I really appreciate you just taking the time to share today. There's so many more avenues we could chase, and we're just going to have a repeat performance, next year to give you like the part B to share, other things that are in your head and experiences you've had. But I really do appreciate you just taking the time. Tell people where the best place to find more info about Blueprint OS.
Yeah. So I'll give them three kind of different places. But first of all, go to our website, go to blueprintos.com/assets. If you go to blueprintos.com/assets, we always have a number of different lead generators on there for us. But we have a lot of free assets. So we've got some mini courses on there. We've got some opt-ins. I'm about to release my Scale ebook is going to be on there, depending on when this episode is going to be dropping. So people can go on there and check that out. Number two, if they want to connect with me on social, I'm not super active on social. I know it's my biggest weakness in business, but if they want to connect with me on social, LinkedIn is the best place to do that. And then, of course, they can check out my podcast, which is Above the Business.
Above the business. Bradley, thank you again, man. Thanks for just sharing your heart and your story behind your journey, and really just doing your part in it's helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Bradley, thanks again. Have a great week. I hope you heard some great takeaways from our guests today. Make sure you reach out to them, and thank you again
for playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide.